Good morning once again. Thank you so much for coming to our last day of our Michigan Recovery Friendly Workplace Policy Workshop mini series. This is day three. We are focusing on the how for creating, implementing RFW policies, really diving into taking in all of that amazing information that we have had for day one and day two, and now thinking about how do we apply all of this. And I'm going to skip our kind of formal, what is recovery friendly workplace? Why are we here? And invite you to please attend one of our upcoming sessions that will kind of dive into why we do what we do, why our employers are really focusing on recovery friendly policies and how to become designated as a recovery friendly workplace. I will put links to registration for these two upcoming events that are taking place in the chat here shortly. But we do have an informational webinar that kind of goes over the nuts and bolts of how we do it here in Michigan and how to become designated. We also will have a Recovery Month kickoff employer panel, hear from the employers on how they're doing this, why they are designated, and how they're really transforming the cultures that they support and provide their employees. So that'll be coming up on September 1st as well. And so today, just kind of a quick overview of our objectives. We're going to be understanding how to incorporate those core components we learned about, and really applying them to the policies. How do we apply drug testing in the workplace and determine next steps, consequences, and support with that recovery-friendly lens? And then really hoping to allow some time for questions and answers. So as we dive in, once again, I'm welcoming Joe McGuire, who will be leading this discussion on our day three, has really been along this journey with us. And thank you so much again, Joe, for all your hard work on this. It's been a wonderful partnership, and I hope we can do this again. But thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to turn this over to you if you want to start sharing your screen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nikki, so much. And thank you to the team for having me. It really has been just a delight, and I'm so glad that we've gotten to spend this time together with each of you. Hopefully, you've got your policies today. I'm hoping they're in front of you and you've made some notes and you've got lots of questions for me. We're going to go through the how today. How do we implement this? What does it look like? What does that mean? And I'm going to jump right in, and I want to move through my slides really quickly today so that I can have lots of time with you for discussion. And I really hope that you bring those questions to the table. So
Joe,
oh, yes.
sorry to interrupt, but we're seeing your presentation mode.
Okay, let me switch that. Let's see. I might stop sharing and then just make sure that I'm sharing the other screen here. Share, let's see, make sure we got the right one. Is that better?
It is still processing. Give it 1 second here. Yep, we're all set.
Okay, there we go. All right, cool. All right, so again, our goal is finding a balanced, mindful approach. And this is something that we are looking at sort of a new era in workplace policies. We've been down the zero tolerance hole. Historically, we've been down the nobody really did anything rabbit hole as well. So now we're taking a step back and going, what were lessons learned from A and B, and how do we come up with a C approach that works well and takes into consideration the well-being of our employees? How do we approach the workplace with compassion? Look, I know that often in the work environment, it's produce, 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 right? Get the job done. But if we don't take a step back and care about people and do this with compassion, we just burn people out, burn people out, burn people out. We're constantly training new people. Turnover, we're always starting from square zero and then building them up and trying to get them to learn the job. That costs money, that costs time, and that costs productivity. So if we create those networks of compassion and we help people when they're struggling before they end up in a crisis or with a policy violation, that's the approach that we want to take. How do we do that? I would love to have time to discuss that with you a little bit, but we're moving through this pretty quickly. So just keep that in mind, okay? So I've shown you over the last 2 weeks that good balanced policy it has to take a mindful approach, and it has to be not only good on paper, but also carried out properly. I'm going to dig into that just a little bit more here today. So, because we're going to talk about violations, and that's probably the hardest part of the policy. Okay. So, policy enforcement for violations is necessary, it has to happen. Because when we let substance abuse problems go on and on without acknowledging them, we're hurting people. All right. And so we have to think about that. Where not only is it the individual who could be getting themselves in like a deeper hole of trouble, but we're creating an unsafe environment for those around that work around them. So we're not taking care of everyone else as well. So we have to have violations and enforcement, and that's necessary, but it's the responses. It's how we respond that changes everything. Not every violation has to be, immediate termination. So in most cases, the violation tells us a story of what's been building under the surface for a while. Someone didn't just decide yesterday to do drugs and they get caught in their workplace tomorrow. They didn't just decide to go on a bender and drink one night completely out of character, then the next day show up, twice the legal limit, and they're done. That's not how this works. These are systemic things that are going on and on in their lives. And how can we help detect and deter before the violation occurs? How can we respond with compassion? How can we let people self-report? How can we help them with treatment, whether short-term, long-term, inpatient, outpatient? What does that look like? How can we continue to educate and make people aware that they may have developed a problem, and maybe they're not ready to hear it, but at least they will know that there's help and that we can help them, right? So some of the most successful models that we are seeing across the country offer on-site peer support programs by people who are also in recovery, or already in recovery, maybe I should say. I love that model. I'm so excited about that model, that people can, this is to me like one of the number one ways of removing that stigma, is bringing peer support together with people who can rely on one another, and celebrate their work-life balance together, and also be there in case someone is having a hard time and they're wanting to return to previous behaviors. We all have to understand and learn and spend time. This is not the time, but I'm sure that Michigan Recovery Friendly Workplace can help if they haven't already taught. That substance use disorder is not a moral failure. The science shows us there are biological predispositions, and there are brain changes to those predispositions when that brain is fed a substance. Certain brains go, ooh, I need more of that. I want that. I have to have this to survive. Where, many of us don't. And we have a hard time understanding that. And so we look at them and go, just stop. Just stop. What is wrong with you? And it doesn't work like that for the other half of the population. So we've got to, instead of standing in judgment, we need to figure out how to work with that biology. All right. Again, I'm just going to talk about self-reporting several times, because I think that is something that we don't tend to look at, and that we have a tendency. I mean, I heard the other day of someone who, just the other day, we had an employee that self-reported. So what did we do? We put him in a SAP and a return to duty follow-up program. He's on suspension. He's this, he's this, he's that. Like, they started punishing him, putting a black mark on his commercial driver's license record, putting him in the FMCSA clearinghouse as a violation. Self-reporting is not a violation. That person should not be subject to all of those things. Do they need support? Yes, but they don't need the punitive path by any means, because they're doing the right thing. Now, if they want to do some follow-up testing to help themselves stay on task, that's one thing, but you don't report it as a violation in the national database where they're at risk of losing their license if they don't comply, and it costs a ton of money. So we have to really think about self-reporting is in its own category. Okay. We always provide confidentiality, dignity, and respect. Can we provide any support time for recovery, through family benefits or whatever that looks like? And then can we offer recovery and support groups on site? Is there a conference room where AA meetings can take place or whatever have you? Now, I'm going to move into the rest of the components of the policy. We've answered a lot of these questions as we've gone along. Some of them we've dipped our toe in. We haven't gone all the way. But these are the things today that we're going to really look at. I'm not going to read them word for word, but this is where we're going to kind of finish up the rest of the story. Now, I've mentioned each week how important it is to communicate the policy. You have to plan for communication. You have to review it. You have to repeat it. You have to continuously remind people about your policy. I've said this every week. And then today, here are some examples of opportunities in which you can offer that reminder. So, first of all, in the new employee interview, you can be very clear that we are a recovery friendly workplace, but we do enforce our policies and that these are our expectations. Whether or not you choose to pre-employment drug test, let people know the expectations so that they can be prepared. So it's not a bait and switch with them. Okay. Make sure they read the policy and sign the handbook sheet. Now, I know not everybody has a tendency to read every word of that and they sign it. I always say employees get the handbook, they flip through and go holidays, check. Flip through dress code, let's see, no flip flops, no yoga pants, check. Flip through and sign, and they're on their way. I've watched it. Legally, if they don't read that policy, they're still liable for signing their name on the dotted line. You might want to remind them of that. I get they don't always get the full body and scope of information in the employee handbook, but it is legally protective for them and for the employer. In employee orientation, you can make their ears hear the words again. Okay, so now we've got three opportunities. Job performance reviews, we can just remind people of our policies. Here's a reminder of the handbook. Here's a reminder, sign again, so that you've got every, like annually, biannually, how often you do these things, you've got coverage to say, we're telling them and we're telling them, but also company-wide meetings, safety meetings, team meetings. I always say if you have a full safety program and you're not talking about substance use and abuse, you might as well throw every toolbox, toolkit, safety program, everything out the window, because if you don't talk about substances in those meetings, you are completely missing the boat. A lot of people today, young people especially, they don't get drug education in schools. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. Historically, that is literally a whole entire other presentation that I do. But one thing that I want you to know is a lot of your younger workers come into the workforce today. They've never known anything but a drug-friendly culture in their lives, and they haven't had any drug education. And all of their social media and pop culture messages tell them that substances are cool. And then we're wondering why they're shocked when they have a violation and they don't know that they did anything wrong. We've got to be educating people. So again, I think I said it before last week or the week before. I'm sorry you suddenly had to become a drug expert in your workplace, but it is kind of part of the name of the game here. And so it is your responsibility to teach them and help them understand through employee education, substances and safety don't mix at work. All right. So those are some ideas for communicating. Now, part of your policy is going to be the drug testing piece, as we talked about last week. What I want you to understand is you need to choose how you will test people. We talked about the substances you're going to test for, but what type of testing meets your needs? Is it going to be your analysis? Are you going to do hair testing? Hair is history, 30 to 90 days, depending on how much hair you take. Do you have enough safety sensitive people, or is their position safety sensitive enough that you have to be that rigorous? Mining, oil and gas. A lot of them do hair testing. Some trucking companies do hair testing. Oral fluid and saliva, that's a more recent use test. I love it. Lab-based oral fluid is a wonderful, wonderful tool. DOT is still in the midst of trying to get it implemented. There's some holdups at the FDA with some, red tape stuff that they're working on, but it's not about the oral fluid test. It's just administrative stuff. But we are looking at an explosion of oral fluid. I'm hoping in the next 5 to 10 years where that will be the more mainstream test. Rapid testing. Are you going to utilize this? Just a note, you never make an employment decision on a rapid test. It can save you a lot of money to go negative, 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 negative. This is great. But once you've got the non-negative result, that needs a lab-based confirmation, okay? And then what panel of drugs are you going to do? Are you going to use the DOT 5-panel model? Are you going to go 10, 20, 25? A lot of those, once we get over the five, a lot of those are derivatives, like they're opiate breakdowns and things like that. But what is trending in your area? What's trending in your region? What are the new drugs that are popping up? How do you test for those? And sometimes that can get costly. So get a quote. Don't just decide this arbitrarily. Get a quote and find out what these costs are. And also, you can change it up. You can do, everybody can do the standard 5 or 7 panel, and then in certain circumstances, if you don't see anything, you could expand the panel. And then you can just always make that decision on, look, this is not safe behavior. We're pulling the trigger here on an action because something isn't right and safety is at risk. So it's just a piece of the puzzle that can help you be a clue, but it's not the end of the story. And then I always say, please, please, please make sure that you use certified collections professionals that are trained, that can show you their certificate of training, that ensures that your tests aren't going to get canceled, people aren't going to be cheating your tests, and that you're going to have a program that has integrity to it. I've kind of already gone through the different types here of testing very briefly, but I'm going to give you a little bit more detail. So oral fluid, it's less invasive. It's always observed, right? It's always, you don't need a bathroom and you always know what's going on. Very difficult to overcome that test through cheating methods. It can detect use of marijuana within the last 4 to 24 hours, depending on the device, and it doesn't go beyond that window. So that's something that I think is very attractive to employers, especially in legal states where you're trying to make sure that you don't get use from last weekend or whatever. Some of those things are very mythical and not exactly how it works, but it does help people sleep at night. And it's a more accurate picture of what has been happening recently with that THCA. Okay. Lab-based results with MRO verification are evidential. That means they hold up in court on the lab-based test. This is a very good test. It is growing in popularity, like I said, and it's excellent for on-site testing. Like if you're on the side of the road, you're at a construction site, you've had a post-accident in the workplace, people can come right out, they can do that oral fluid test. You're not looking for a bathroom. You're not trying, right? So I really do love this test. Lab-based urinalysis, it is still considered the highest quality test. So a lot of people go, we know that this is not effective anymore. And it's just not true. That scientifically, the results prove out it is highly evidentiary, which means, again, stands up in court. But you and your collectors, your collection sites that you use, whoever you farm that out to, or if you do it in-house, they need to understand how to overcome cheating. You've got to follow the proper protocols, make sure people empty out their pockets, listen for tampering, look at the temperature strip. Tampering can be caught very easily if people are trained and they just even care halfway about what they're doing. It's pretty simple to overcome that. But I've seen a lot of places like, and this is no slam on the occupational healthcare system as a whole, but there's some occ health groups where these people, they're like, I wanted to get into the medical profession. I didn't get this job to become someone who collects pee all day, and they have a low opinion of their role in the safety process, and so they're not checking, and people cheat like crazy. I could tell you stories all day long. We don't have time for that, but sometime you just want to hear my stories because there's a lot of really good ones. But these are things that if we're going to do this program, we want to do it right. We want to do it with integrity. Your analysis detects occasional marijuana use 24 to 72 hours after use, not 30 days. That is not a thing. And this is occasional use. Now, if it's daily, chronic, all day, whatever, vaping, that's lifestyle. It's a lifestyle test. One-time use is very hard to detect because it usually comes under the cutoff levels, but you can trust and rely in your analysis, and feel good about that. Again, always get that lab-based confirmation. I just want everyone to really hear me. Never make an employment decision on a rapid test because rapid tests do not rule out second-hand exposure. We talked about that briefly last week. I want to make sure that nobody is doing anything that could harm someone and that is not fair because they didn't get the lab-based confirmation. Always use a medical review officer, also referred to as an MRO. The medical review officer is a buffer between you and the employee. If you're a DOT testing site, you have to by federal law. But if you're non-DOT, this is optional. The reason you want the medical review officer in your program is that when you get those lab test results, you're not trying to interpret them. You're not trying to figure them out. You're not the person that's responsible for confronting the employee. You're not trying to explain what you don't know. Contract through your lab with a medical review officer. They can refer people to you, right? And those are people that will get those results directly. They are the buffer. They contact the employee. They say, do you have a prescription? You're staying out of the HIPAA side. Do you have a prescription that explains this? Can you send it to me? The doctor can look at it. You should not be. And then once the doctor determines is that legal, valid use, etc., then they will determine if that is actually a positive or if that's converted into a negative drug test result. They do all of that for you, and then you just get the answer over here on this side. And legally, this protects you in a huge way. So I did not want to fail to mention that. A lot of people today are saying, Joe, all we want to do is the impairment testing. So when are we going to have that impairment test for marijuana, right? The answer is no time soon. This is very complicated. There is a wonderful breathalyzer machine out there right now that I think is looking the most promising of anything we've seen in 20 years. But guess what? What does the measurement mean? It doesn't really tell us much. I mean, it's awesome to have that positive confirmation, which you could also get in an oral fluid test or a urine test. It's just a positive confirmation because we don't have any impairment standard right now. We don't have a legal measurement. We don't have anything that tells us yay or nay. What does this actually mean? Look, this is a cool device and it can help you decide if someone should be in a safety sensitive job site or not instantly. That's awesome. But we have a long way to go before we actually get to that impairment measurement. So I just want you to be very aware of that. So then you have to, in your policy, you have to outline how you will test. In previous weeks, I've gone through and I've like read all the sections of the policy to you so that we could really break it down and dig into it. I'm not going to get into that today. And one of the reasons for that is just because these are decisions that you really have to make, noodle on, think about, and that's for you to spend some time with. But you do want to outline: will a chain of custody form be used? It should legally be used. How will the samples be sealed, and how will you protect the integrity? Will people be allowed to challenge their results and have the second specimen tested at the lab? And it's at a third party lab, so they send that second specimen out and get a second result. Will you allow that challenge to happen? That would mean you have to do split specimen testing, which is no different than doing single specimen testing. So these are things that really matter. You want to outline with this language. And of course, we're making these slides available to you. You can find the language at SAMHSA. This is stuff that's not particularly hard, but you have to decide what it looks like for your workplace. And I'm just giving you like these tools. And also know that for those of you who completed these sessions and have gone through this workshop with us, Nikki has my full checklist of things that should be in your policy that you will get at the end. And I also, as promised, gave you my reasonable suspicion checklist, my simple one that's just one sheet that makes it super easy. So those are just a couple of tools. There are plenty others out there, but we want you to be armed. Okay, so violations and consequences. What are going to be the consequences of violating a policy? You have to determine this. One thing that I want to be very clear with you about is please do not put on every single section of your policy that the consequences will be determined on a case-by-case basis. That does not protect you at all. And human nature is to treat people differently because of their status, because of their job performance, because of their job duties, because of the length of time they've been on the job. And sometimes that's warranted. Sometimes that's okay. And you can do that on occasion, but you need to document why you did it and not just have it be arbitrary because it can look like favoritism and you can get sued. So I have a case and I tell this story all the time. A country club, a big giant country club, like housing development, sprawling place. They had a groundskeeper. He violated the policy for marijuana. He got fired. Boom. A few months later, actually, I think it was close to a year later, someone in the office violated the policy for opiates, and she was allowed to keep her job. Now, the policy didn't make clear why one was fired and one kept the job at all. There was no distinction. The policy was about 3 pages long. I read it. There was no criteria for this or that. What they didn't know is that the groundskeeper was the nephew of the office worker. And when he found out that she had a violation and got to keep her job, he sued them for wrongful termination and he won his case. They actually settled, but he settled for buku bucks because he said, this is discrimination because of my role, and they kept her. They didn't keep me, and they didn't tell me why, and there was no criteria for why they fired me. And he won because they didn't put any guardrails around that. Was their decision necessarily right or wrong? I don't know, but if they would have outlined it in their policy and made it clear as to why this was a fireable offense and this one wasn't, they would have won that case. So I want you to make sure that you don't avoid this part of the policy conversation because it can get you in trouble. So go through and decide what that looks like, and that decide whether or not you can use some recovery friendly language in there. This is where it's really going to happen. Aside from like the mission statement and the support that you're going to provide, the violations is where you're really going to make a difference, as we mentioned earlier. So here's some sample language in here that kind of gives you some ideas. There's a little bit of everything in there that you can pull from and take from and put your violations consequences sections together. How will you handle applicant positives, first time positives, refusals to cooperate, tampering with the test, suspensions? What does that look like? Post accidents, verified positive results. It's not just a one blanket scenario. You need to go through each type of violation and how it occurs and decide what that looks like. And I'm always happy to have conversations with you. If you want to talk this stuff out later, please, I'm here for you as a resource. That's one of the reasons we wanted to do this. I really strongly suggest you use an EAP or an SAP. And you might be a small business and think we can't afford an EAP. Let me tell you, there's some affordable programs out there. And I'm talking like $25 per employee a month, which I know adds up if you're a small business, but some of them give discounts for multiple, some of them at blanket cost. There's a small provider in Ohio that they really work with companies because they want them to be covered. They care about mental health. There's some great resources. So don't count it out because many EAPs are really affordable. And if you haven't heard that language before, that's an employee assistance program where there's some mental health support. There's some referral support. They can help you understand how to apply for family medical leave if someone needs to be in treatment or whatever have you. And also the substance abuse professional is critical to the violation program, where your employees, when they have a violation, they can get that support to have an evaluation to see, is this someone who really needs some training and education because they didn't realize they were violating the policy in this manner and their use was maybe at a recreational level or they overconsumed. But this is not someone who appears to have a substance use disorder because, again, as I said last week, this is a spectrum, all right? You can't just lump everybody into one definition of a violation. It's a spectrum, okay? And that does make it a little more difficult to make some decisions, but it is the fairest way to go. It's the most humane way to go. It's compassionate way to go. And it's the recovery friendly way to go. So your substance abuse professional can help you evaluate those people with a violation and determine what they need. Another thing that I want to make sure I point out is the last set of bullets here. Identify local resources that may be available to your employees and give them a handout of who are treatment providers in our community, um, who are the substance abuse professionals we're going to recommend that we like to work with. Where are your local AA meetings, NA meetings? What is out there in our community? If you're in Michigan, perhaps Michigan Recovery Friendly Workplace can help you find those resources so that you can give them a sheet and say, while you are out on leave or while you are on a 30-day suspension or whatever that looks like, or even, we're sorry that you're terminated, but we want you to have this support. And here's the list of resources. It is up to the employee what they do with them, but be that company. Okay. And then I have some language here for whether maybe you don't have that EAP, who shoulders the cost of return to duty and follow-up testing if you allow it, but you don't have the provisions for it. So what does that look like? So these are some things that are, again, just some options for you. I want us to remember that what is always zero tolerance is working while under the influence, working while intoxicated, no working buzz stone under the influence. These are things that we need to make clear. Again, I'll repeat it. Substances and safety don't mix. That's part of our education. So that's always zero tolerance, but that's zero tolerance in a box. And then our responses to violations are different. A word of caution from me to you, please never discriminate. Always think about those EEOC and ADA compliance issues that we covered in the first 2 weeks. Substance use disorders may have protections in your state. So it's just a little reminder. I'm not going to go back through and reteach that, but if you missed the first 2 weeks, please make sure that you go back and watch that. Mental health conditions may have protections. If you have someone, let's say bipolar, diagnosed schizophrenia, I know the terms change all the time, but depending on where you live, that person may have some protections for certain medications that they use or behaviors or outcomes or whatever have you. And maybe not. If there are a lot of the ADA protections say if you're not in treatment, following the treatment plan, et cetera, you don't get the protection, but just do your research, do your homework. Carrying a certificate for use of marijuana as a medicine is not a violation. We talked about that in the first week with the legal cases. So make sure that you remember someone flashing that card to you. It doesn't mean they're protected, but it also doesn't mean they get fired just for having that. So that's what we mean by don't discriminate. Okay, we did mention in our planning, we want to talk a little bit about work from home policies. Um, and I'm just going to touch lightly on this because I've given you a sample policy on the next page that you can get this presentation and pull it right off of there. But what about people who work from home, especially in the post-pandemic era, right? Some of us, our entire workforce is from home except for one or two people. We have to remember that working from home is still a work environment. And so remote workers, we have to understand they still have to come to their desk. I'm in my home office today. I'm in the back of my house. I still have to be here ready to work. And yes, I'm wearing pants and yes, I'm wearing shoes. So I sit here every day, full hair and makeup. I'm ready. Well, I can't say I wear makeup every day. Sometimes I don't. So, but I've got to be ready to be here in a safe manner, alert and ready to help assist. I cannot show up to a meeting with, my 2 o'clock wine. No day drinking. On the job, you're on the job. So the work from home policy helps to establish that we can still test. And so here's a sample telecommuter agreement. Again, it's on your slides, but you don't have to use all of this. You don't have to define it the way that I do, but this is something that I think would be helpful. A violation is still a violation. Okay. Because and you have to figure out how you're going to drug test that person. They're in their home. Are they under the influence? You're going to send someone to their house to test them? I don't know. But guess what? There's now some remote drug testing programs. By that, I mean they can drone or FedEx a test to that person. They can get online, scan a code, get online. Someone can observe them, do the oral fluid test, put it in the box, package it up, send it back. And that's something that is an option that's spreading across the country. It's really wonderful. All right. What about MAT or MAUD practices? So we're talking about medically assisted treatment. What does that look like? And that is something that we want you to consider. Will you allow? Get yourself educated. Learn what this means. Learn about the programs. Don't assume I'm trading one addiction for another. I'm trading one drug for another. That's very old school thinking. Are there people that do that? Of course there are. But that if we again discriminate and classify everyone in that box, we're making a grave mistake, because most people who are using MAT or MAUD programs are having tremendous success. They're highly productive. This is what they need to help with that body chemistry issue, that brain chemistry issue. And we really are seeing so much success here. So make sure that, especially in the drug testing portion, you are addressing this. Your MRO is helping you. Your MRO is apprised of how you're going to approach that, what you want that to look like. All right, we just have a couple more slides here. I wanted to mention fitness for duty evaluations. So maybe someone passes all the drug screens. You just can't find a problem, but the behavior is not working, or they had a prescription medication and the test came back negative because the MRO said they showed me the prescription. Something's just not right. The employer always has the right to request a fitness for duty evaluation to make sure this individual can perform their tasks in a safe and productive manner. And then from there, the physician can help determine how to bring them back to a safe and productive manner if that's not how these medications are allowing them to operate. It's a wonderful tool. And I think often employers are uninformed about that option, or don't use it. They forget. I do realize that in recovery friendly programs, people are concerned about guardrails. You're just going to let everything get out of control. One thing that I want to say is if someone has had a violation, they've been given a second chance or whatever you're going to call that, you can keep record of work performance to make sure they're staying on task. You can implement an accountability plan together. You can utilize that follow-up testing as a tool in the toolbox. You can create a plan for relapse. It can be part of the journey. So plan for it, anticipate for it, and talk about what will self-reporting look like? What will we do together? But know that return of signs and symptoms mandate a response for you to best support that person. Take immediate action. Make sure supervisors are trained again on those signs and symptoms. Keep the conversation about safety, not about the substances, and then continue that caring approach, but do enforce the boundaries. Some states actually offer insurance programs specifically for employers who do second chance policy programs. You can check to see if your state offers that. And then my final word to you is commit to your policy. You have to use it consistently. You have to follow through every single time. You have to do what the policy says. If you go off of the res for any reason, document your reasoning so that you have legal backup on why you had to make a different decision, and who decided that, and what was that about. And just remember those court cases we talked about. Documentation can protect you, but the policy and following the policy is where you really want to be, 99% of the time. Okay, with that, I would love to invite any of you who have some questions, need some support. I'm going to put up my last slide because it has my email, Joe McGuire at NDASA.com. And that is really brief. So take a screenshot of it really fast, because I'm going to stop sharing so that we can just kind of be on the slide together, or on the screen together, sorry. And yeah, I'm really open to whatever questions, concerns, exploring anything over the last 3 weeks together.
Hey, Joe, we do have a question in the chat, so we'll start there. And then if folks want to raise their hand, I'll try to monitor who's going first the best that I can. But the first question in the chat was, are there reputable companies for oral fluid tests, since that is an emerging area? Any thoughts?
So yes, absolutely. We're talking, so let's clarify. Are you talking about for the collections? Are you talking about for the devices or for the lab testing? Because those are three different things that kind of go together.
Yeah, it's Stephanie. I think the question is around if we get approached by different vendors all the time for different things, and we have a wellness clinic, but we have to send people off site and all of that. So I'm just wondering, I think somebody has said, hey, we can come give you something that's like a on-site oral thing for marijuana use that would help you figure out whether that was recent or if the person is kind of making up a story about past weekends use or that kind of thing. And I just don't know who to trust in that space. So are there kind of major companies doing that, or is it just sort of everybody, or is it
No,
just
there's no.
one thing that somebody's all offering the same test?
There's some, yeah, going with salespeople, and especially they can be high pressured, and particularly in a clinical setting, that can be so confusing and rough, and you really never know what you're getting your hands on. There are absolutely some very reputable device manufacturers that have been in this industry for 30 years. One of them is Quantisol. I am not paid by them. I get nothing from saying the word Quantisol whatsoever. There was one that I used to say for many, many years. They went out of business. That made me really sad. They just decided to go into another area of medical testing and kind of offload that piece. But Quest has a good device. Quantisol has a great device. Quantisol will be the first device that DOT uses. There's a single specimen or a split specimen device available. And I think the thing too, and I don't know your situation because it sounds like you're in a clinical setting. Um,
It's
but if
it's
you,
it's not it's agriculture. We just
oh, it's
happen to have
agriculture.
we have a wellness clinic that we use for our drug
Okay,
testing.
perfect. So the most important thing in your wellness clinic is just make sure the collectors are properly trained to use the device so that, and that's with anything, that they're trained and qualified to use the device. And then you use the lab that will test on the Quantisol. But I'm sure there's some others out there, but I would, if you want to speak to any of our members who are really well versed in this, I don't typically dig into that really deeply because I represent a trade association with a lot of device manufacturers. I feel like I can say Quantisol very easily because it will be the DOT device, and I've been training on it like crazy for the last several years, just to kind of make sure that we're ready when DOT is ready. But make sure that device has longevity and it's not something that just came out fresh, hot off the presses. Because when they do that, they don't have that evidentiary backing, and you really don't know if it's going to stand up in court.
Yeah, that's
So,
exactly my concern. Okay. Yeah,
yeah,
thank you so much. That really helps.
yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for the question, Stephanie. Next question in the chat I see is, should policies cover co-occurring disorders? For example, using substances to self-treat for PTSD. How does a company encourage getting support for underlying cause to reduce chance of relapse?
So this is the part where you might be getting a little deep into the weeds. I mean, co-occurring disorders are almost, I don't want to over exaggerate this, but it is these days, it seems to be rare that there's one substance involved. And then that almost always means co-occurring. Mental health is a part of this. I mean, I honestly don't know if you ever have someone who comes in for substance use disorder that a mental health issue is not involved on some underlying in some way, shape, or form. Um, so at the end of the day, really, that's what we're talking, why we're talking about a compassionate approach. Um, that's part of the response is the EAP program. And are you taking care of your whole wellness, whole person wellness? So is it your responsibility to parse out a violation if there's an underlying mental health disorder? There almost always is. Right. So it really is your responsibility to have a compassionate response, get that EAP involved, get that SAP involved, get whatever resources there are around that person to try to deal with it. But ultimately, it's their responsibility to work through their issues. And I'll give you a brief example here. I have a niece who, at 28 years of age, I was assigned her responsible person for the state of Colorado because she was deemed incapable of caring for herself. And not only was it massive drug use that had rapidly declined her mental health. But yes, there were underlying mental health conditions that I believe were triggered in early onset in her early 20s because she got into substance use. It was a big hot mess. Um, we eventually had to get her out of the state because the relapse over and over and over, the stints in mental health facilities, it was just a big, if you've been there, you know what I mean. We got her out of the state, we got her with some other family, she went into a new environment. I believe that to the extent possible, she's been mostly substance free for about the last 5 years. Sometimes she slides a little bit with alcohol, but she's not in the hard drugs like she was at all. And she's married to a 911 responder, and he keeps an eye on her like a hawk. And I think she's living the best life that she can. But I also want to tell you that probably every 90 days for 5 years, she has a new job. And it just happened. She I don't want to say she can't hang on, but there's a lot of mental health stuff there. And every single time the employer's like, we just can't do this anymore. Sorry. I don't know if she's capable of finding that thing. And I think sometimes she's shooting a little high in her capabilities for her mental health issues. But at some point, you have to decide, can we accommodate this or can we not? And maybe you can't. And she keeps choosing healthcare. And healthcare just can't accommodate someone who's not able to fully treat their mental health condition and keep a baseline. And that's where she struggles, is she goes off and on her meds. She doesn't keep her baseline of behavior, and they can't have that in that environment. So that's a really loaded question, and it's really complicated question, but you have to decide where your limits are, and in what you can and cannot accommodate. And I hope that's helpful, because I just think it's super complicated. Does that help, or do you have a follow-up question?
No, that helps, right? I think you mentioned at the end, we still have to have limits, right? Even if it is mental health related, right? As long as they right, have access to the appropriate services, whether through your health insurance EAP or community services. But within the policy, there also has to be that performance related aspect of go with compassion, start with compassion. But if they can't do the job, then that becomes problematic, and you have to have a policy to deal with that.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Barbara, for bringing that up.
Thanks, Barbara. Another quick question in the chat. How frequently would you recommend training for supervisors or agency-wide employees regarding recognizing substance abuse signs or other relevant safety trainings?
That's a great question. At a minimum, every 2 years. Annually is good if you're really safety sensitive. Like if you have a lot of safety sensitive people in there, do it annually. But and let me just say this, I would say every 2 years is a really good, steady, solid. Some of the DOT agencies say recommend every 2 years, although it's not like a hard rule. If you detect any changes in drug use in your community, any trends that are really, kind of changing up the game, do a reasonable cause training, get someone to come in who's an expert on that and talk about it. But the reality of it here is this: the signs and the symptoms don't change as much as the drugs change. The things that are happening in our bodies are pretty consistent, depending on whether it's a stimulant or a depressant. So as long as they're getting that piece, and this is something I want to say to you, a lot of people offer reasonable suspicion training. If they're just coming in and they're going, this is what cocaine looks like, this is what heroin looks like, this is what needles look like, that's not the training you need. The training you need is, are the eyes constricted or dilated? Is there slurring speech? How do you watch them? How do you change the environment and watch their responses? And the supervisors need to understand, what am I physically looking at, not what does cocaine look like. You don't need that, because you're not trying to diagnose the drug. It's important to know trends. So you know what paraphernalia you're looking for. Look, I missed that for a lot of years because I didn't know what paraphernalia looked like, and I realized that was a gap. But as long as you get the behaviors and the thinking and the speech and all of this, that's what you really need. I think 2 years is good if they're paying attention. If they're people who tend to not pay attention, make them sit through it annually until they get it. But yeah, that's my recommendation.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. I see Justin. I see your hand up. Hey, Justin.
Hey everybody. Yeah, I have a question. Earlier, you were talking about how people should not be punished when they come forward and disclose certain things. Now, let's say that uh, a random drug test was taking place, and it was when the individual was approached, or even after the tests were sent out to the labs, that the individual then disclosed that, hey, I've been using cannabis. Is that a gray area, or how
Well,
how how would you handle that?
that's a great question. You guys, this is why I love the Q&A portion so much. To me, that's a whoops, I got caught. Now I'm going to fess up. Right. It could be kind of gray, but it's a darker shade of gray. Because that's not someone who goes, I don't feel right. I, man, I think I'm over consuming. I think I'm having a hard time stopping. I think this is really impacting me. Maybe there was an intervention at home and they went, I got to talk to my boss. It's a totally different area when they know that consequence is looming and then they fess up real quick. But at the same time, this is what I tell employees who are getting the drug test, because how many times we're standing there with them and we're taking the sample and they go, I'm going to come up positive. What should I do? Because they know they didn't get to cheat. We caught the synthetic device already. We took that out of the equation or whatever. I always tell employees, look, it's so much better for you to go to work and tell them this is what's going to happen. I did this thing but I don't want to lose my job. That is a better part of the gray area than just like it's better than cheating the test. It's better than just, not carrying or lying or whatever. So to me, I would rather work through that with them, and that's still a situation, in my opinion, where they need to go get evaluated by the substance abuse professional. Do they need a training course? Do they need to go into that follow-up program? What does that look like? But I would not necessarily, and again, depending on the nature of the safety sensitive, that may not be someone that you terminate. You may give them a second chance because they didn't lie and they didn't cheat. And you've at least got that. But they need to be real about what's going on there, that they can't abstain during the work week at a minimum, right? But it's a great question, and I would handle that more gently in the whole scheme of things. But it's not the same as self-reporting.
Any other questions? We've gone through so much, over the last few weeks, a lot to take in. And so if you have, this is the time. We've got 6 minutes left. Any burning questions?
I'm trying to think if I've got more information that I didn't have time to touch on, but at the end of the day, something that I want you guys to know, you still can find sample policies to get some language from the SAMHSA Drug-Free Workplace website. They seem to, with different presidential administrations, they change sometimes the links and where to find it and how deeply it's buried or readily available it is. But if you Google SAMHSA drug-free workplace policies, you get a lot of resources and information there. You can get some language to use. You can change it up. It's really helpful.
I will send it in a follow-up email as well. And I just want to reiterate that we do have, I see one more question from Abby before I dive in. Go ahead, Abby.
Hi, yeah, my question is related to maybe the kind of treatment period and return to work. So I work with employers in this space as well, specifically in Indiana. And oftentimes I get questions about, well, if we provide kind of the time away for treatment to an individual who self-reports, how do we manage, being at a loss with that person, not being there to complete certain tasks, or even on their return to work if they're not able to participate in their capacity previously? How do we sort of manage that? And I know it can be case by case sometimes, but some kind of general advice that I can give in those question situations would be helpful.
That's a really great question, because anytime someone gets pulled out of the rotation, it's a hardship on other employees. There's a presentation I gave a couple of years ago. I kind of wish it would get more light shed on it sometimes, about how substance use impacts the rest of us, that how workplace substance use impacts families and the employees that are the family members and whatnot. But certainly there's resentment. Part of the presentation is there can be resentment from those employees who choose to work in a safe and sober manner, and then they get more work dumped on them and that kind of thing. So a lot of folks do use temp agencies, and that may or may not be appropriate for you. But if you've got a good relationship with a temp agency and they know exactly what you're looking for, often that will help, where you could downflow some more like administrative type tasks where your people who remain on the job can take sort of the higher level burden. So sometimes that is a helpful thing. I know that there's a company up in northern Colorado that if you're going to be on, they use FMLA, they use the Family Medical Leave Act, for people who have violations. And while they are on that leave, they are responsible for taking courses to keep their skills and their knowledge sharp. Now, this is a manufacturing, it's a massive manufacturing company. And they've designed courses where those employees, they may have missed things previously, they may need to sharpen skills for the future. As long as they continue to take those courses while they are out of rotation, they can come back to their position at the same level. So there's some different creative things that I see companies doing that I think are really amazing. It does take some investment of time to, for instance, create a course like that. Maybe it's simply some human relations courses. Maybe it's something from SHRM. Maybe it's some social improvement. There's a lot of different opportunities you can have there to keep them engaged in doing something, and we're just not sitting home watching our soaps all day, right? And maybe that's not what they're doing at all. They're working really hard on recovery, but there can be some baseline things. And I think one of the things that is important about groups like these, I think employers who are doing these things successfully should be helping to share and pass down ideas and give feedback and provide some creative ideas for how they are overcoming this. So I would really encourage everybody to reach out to each other. And, if you've got a better idea and you're on the call, please pop in. I'm certainly, because I haven't been in the employer seat in the way that you are for 10 years now, because I'm running the association, someone else has definitely a better idea than I do, for sure.
Thanks, Abby, for the question. And thanks, Joe, for that. I think that there are so many people who are doing amazing things in this space. So we definitely try to encourage them to share. And I know that there's a large platform of us across the country that are working with employers. So I think that's potentially one of those future opportunities. We'll have a employer panel coming up on September 1st. I put the link in the chat for that. We can ask those questions of those who really are supporting their teams in unique ways, from different industries. And I think that's really important to bring in as a factor as well.
Eliza with the National Recovery Friendly Workplace, I'm not sure she's on here today, but they, in the National Recovery Friendly Workplace program, there are member companies that are on the employer council that have been doing some crazy, incredible, wonderful work here. they are always so generous and gracious and willing to share what's working and how it's working. Um, Perhaps that's something that she can bring to the table with her for this group. Um, because we did a roundtable at the White House a couple of years ago in celebration of the launch of National Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative. And I just got the privilege of listening to many of these groups, like United Auto Workers, and there were construction, there were all kinds of um, product manufacturing and from all over the country. And some of the things that they brought to the table, I was just in awe of what they're doing. So that is for sure a resource on some ideas and what people are putting into place that is just changing things for them. So please utilize that resource as well.
Absolutely. Monty, actually from Petoskey area, was there at that round table, and there are amazing things happening. So it is 11 o'clock, and I know that we didn't get to all the questions in the chat and some notes. There were some additional links that were put in. Eliza did put a note about the federal government across administrations has reaffirmed that the drug-free workplace requirements that federal contractors are beholden to are not in conflict with being a recovery-friendly workplace. Thank you for that, Eliza. There is a toolkit that she put in and we often share as well. There are so many great resources out there, and we will try to continue to share them as well through the Michigan Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative, and hope that we can stay in connection with many of you that have joined from across the country and across Michigan as well. Thank you so much for your time. And Joe, it's been such a pleasure to work with you on this. I can't say thank you enough for everything you have done.
Look, you say that, but my presentations have gone in like at midnight the night before, and I have stressed you out over the last several months, but thank you for your patience with me.
I know that we will always, these comes together. So I just appreciate you. And let's stay connected, everyone. Please consider joining future trainings. Let us know what you need to know. This is how we grow as a group. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful
Thank you
day.
all. Bye.
Bye.